Okay, well, thank you very much, Lindsay, for inviting me over tonight. It's fantastic to see so many faces way back there, and many that I know. And the last time I was in this building was just after finishing my PhD here, and one of my examiners actually in the room now. But the last time I came here was I had my PhD bound, cost me a fortune, came up with these big black books. I looked at them really proud. There was a spelling mistake on the front of it. Not caused by me, but possibly in the wrong place. So the feeling to be in this building are many, and partly because it's so beautiful and new now. It wasn't like that when I was here. But what I'm going to talk to you about, two things. Partly it's about the very simple use of technology. This is not cutting edge technology. This is sort of technology that you have in your classrooms most of the time. But I'm also going to talk about research, and ICT is a tool for the research, because some of you will be doing that in your own work. And as you see, I'm now at the University of Oxford. At the University of Oxford, what I do is I train PGCE English secondary students. I work with master's students, many of them doing things very like you are, Alice, in primary schools. And I also work with PhD students who often are interested in the effects of technology and writing. But my contacts are these. I was a classroom teacher up to about 14 months ago, and I taught in the southwest for some 16 years. And I put a couple of my local schools up there. But that was still there actually, but that was Merrywood School, Merry School in Knoll West, where I taught in the combined school for 3 years before they shut it down completely. I'm not sure that was due to me. And this was the second school I taught locally. This is Filton High School up in South Gloucestershire, and that is my classroom, which is disappearing. If I tell you that in my first school in Merrywood, my classroom was used as part of the set for teachers, which was a satirical programme on teaching, and my second class had been knocked down. I suppose my history is a bit mixed in terms of what I did to schooling in Bristol, but hopefully before I destroyed the schools, I did have some influence on some of the children. And my background was comprehensive schooling. That's where I've always worked, in secondary comprehensive schooling, and my background with the university is firstly working with the Interactive project, where it was actually Ros, sitting here, came into Filton High School and got a bunch of sort of youngish, I wouldn't say young, but young, some jaded, some cynical teachers, got us together and said, are you interested in using ICT? And we said, yes we are, but it always breaks, and we're really quite scared. And that's the start of a journey which involved me working with people like Pat Triggs, who's sitting out there, and Federica, who's sitting out there somewhere, actually looking at my own teaching as well as the children's teaching. So what was done in the Interactive project, it was a research project working with classroom teachers and researchers, where we actually did a lot of filming of classrooms, which initially I found quite embarrassing, to be honest. I don't know how you feel looking at yourself as a teacher, but initially I did. It was through that I picked up a series of action research cycles, which is the sort of cycles where you're looking into your own practice and developing your own practice and actually changing the things that you do to try and influence young people. And it was through that eventually led to a very long and tortuous process of many years of me finishing my PhD, which has moved me on to Oxford. But the important thing for me is thinking that all these things are linked. They're not separate. They're not just when I was a teacher, now I'm a researcher teaching teachers. They're very much organically linked, and they're all linked back into the classroom. And here's the things that used to worry me, much like the two potters, and the third one, not a potter, but the two potters talking about reluctant writers. And actually, it's a thing that worried me more than anything else. The implications for pedagogy and the implications for research. I was really interested in writers writing on computers, particularly boys, particularly reluctant writers, as you were talking about, because my experience was that reluctant writers, they didn't like writing when I told them to, but they liked writing when I didn't like to tell them to. They used to write on each other, they used to write on the table, they used to write little notes which they surreptitiously passed under the thing, but as soon as I said, now, children, let's write a story, and I've had very extreme reactions of reluctant writers, actually physically, this was in Merrywood, so I can say this because it's closed, physically getting their story and lighting it with a lighter, and the whole thing goes up in the air, because I tried to approach this child who really didn't want me to see their writing. And I thought, working with Pat, maybe there's something in them using a very simple bit of technology, a computer, maybe the fact that they can hide it when I come up close, or they can change it without worrying, made a difference. This lesson here was my first ever effort to use an interactive whiteboard. It's a split screen. The whiteboard was actually behind me, and I think this was filmed by Sally Barnes and possibly Federica. This actual piece of video. But I was trying to find ways to break children from the mold of ripping up their bits of paper. The other thing that happened to me is that the university introduced me to some quite complex theory, and it was I was never reluctant about theory. I always enjoyed looking at theory. But actually, when I looked at this, Vygotsky, which is the person I read a lot when I was in the university, he actually scared the living daylights of as a teacher. First one didn't. Central fact of human existence is mediation. So you learn by collaboration, you learn by using tools, you learn by working with other people. But this second one really scared me. Education always denotes a change. If nothing changes, then nothing has been taught. And that's a pretty scary thing to say, isn't it? Because if nothing changes, nothing has been taught. What it led me to do is look about what that actually means in a classroom. And Vygotsky talked about the actual level of a child, the level of a child that they can achieve with assistance, either an adult or a more capable other pupil, and the development. The important thing about when we're looking at children is not just looking, oh, have they achieved this during the lesson, can they put their hand up and answer? Are they developing? So how do we look at that? There's the zone of proximal development, Vygotsky's theory. So there's the actual level of development. For most of my reluctant writers, that was at a level of writing a little bit, not letting me see, scribble it, throw it away. What they could do with assistance, and finally internalising and appropriating this to develop performance. This is where I wanted them to get. Now, writing, I think, is a really difficult thing to do. I still write a lot. I still find it really difficult. It's still painful. I still spend a lot of time doing the equivalent of chucking my papers in the air. But the important thing about writing is it starts on the social level. So just like the videos that we saw the boys doing, the job was showing, and the blogs with Alice, it's a social thing. It's intermental. It's between people. James Britton, who's was at the Institute, talked about writing taking place upon a sea of talk. Nothing happens without it. But once you get to that point of trying then to write for an abstract audience, it's really difficult. That translation of inner speech into abstraction of symbolising into writing, the transformational side, is really difficult. And Vygotsky calls that the deliberate structuring of the web of meaning. He's got a lovely use of metaphors, Vygotsky, by the way. So what does that mean in terms of classroom activity? So here's a few stills taken from videos of me. This is in a school in Chippenham, so it's not in Bristol. And you'll see there's some pretty dated computers, big chunky things. They were dirty old computers. There was nothing much to them. There was no internet on them. There was really very little, except a little bit of word art that they could use. But the important thing to me was what they did when they started writing and what they created in terms of a space. My way of teaching it offered me to get the children to talk and then to write on a bit of paper. What happened here was in getting them to work collaboratively and writing together, I was able to break the space, or the space was broken by themselves. This follows a sequence. So what I asked them to do was write a dual narrative. And the first time I asked them to do this, I asked them to write two separate parts of a story which related to a whole story. So it was a case of a monster story. The monster was wandering around the school and there was a child being chased by this monster. One of them wrote the story of the monster, the other one wrote the story of the child. And then they sequenced them together, they put them together. And it worked relatively well. But what I realised is I wasn't really getting to collaborate at all. I was getting them to sequence two stories. So I changed it to get to write, not on their separate screens, like this was the first action research cycle. Ooh, and very interactive whiteboard. And in a second research cycle, I got them to actually write together. And if you look what they're doing, in this first one, here's me intervening. This lad here, I call him Tim in the research, was the most reluctant writer of the pair. They're both quite reluctant. but he was particularly, I suppose afraid is the word, of actually putting anything down on paper. And you'll see what he's doing. He's sitting away from it. His partner had done the writing. Once I'd left and had this discussion, he took over the writing. He takes over after about 10 minutes in the sequence. But by the end of the sequence, they're actually physically writing together. They're not just talking about it. They're not just composing in terms of their oral sense or what they're deciding between them. They are physically writing to the point, neither of them could type very well, they're like me. They're typing like this, over the top of each other, as they're creating the words. And actually, occasionally one of them would say, no, and they'd erase it. The talk became part of the physicality. And to me, this meant something different was happening. It wasn't just a material tool, it was something happening to the way they were thinking in terms of their psychological development. How we do for time?
5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay. When I look back to mediated acting, so I go back to my Vygotsky book, Tome, I was interested in pupils as learners, and I was interested in them as writers, and to me, those two things were quite linked together. I thought, if it's difficult, if it's abstract, if it's complex, it must have something to do with learning, if they're developing these skills. I also thought then of the computer as a tool for mediation, because like many of you, I suspect, I had lots of kids in my classroom. In secondary school, most of the time I had 30 kids in my classroom, sometimes 32 kids in my classroom. So the idea of me being the mediator for every single one of these children at every one time seemed to me quite difficult. I could do it occasionally. I had to find some way to scaffold this for their learning. The computer, and the fact that we didn't have enough computers, became the tool for that. The fact that they had to share physically within the room. So what was a problem became the tool. In two ways. Firstly, it was a physical tool that allowed them to collaborate, allowed them to play. And one of the great things about both the examples that we saw from the Potters was the idea that those children playing, and in play they're developing, their heads above their normal level of development. But also in terms of psychological tools, the actual ability to control words and deal with abstraction. I also saw it as a situated activity. It seemed to be very important to think about where these children were writing and what they were doing. On the right-hand side, I saw the ICT as therefore being a collaborative tool, and certainly, in my teaching experience after this, you see the same pair there with their one text. This other boy, who's a very naughty boy, comes back and he joins in. He joins in with this activity. He starts commenting on the story, starts developing the story. But I also saw it as a way to research, partly myself. So I watched myself what I was doing, and the very fact that these children are working together, and I'm sitting not bang in front of them going, do this, do that. I'm trying to be part of the computer, I'm sort of pointing over like this. They weren't really looking at me very much, if you look at the video work. They're looking at the screen. So it took out that sort of immediate authoritative figure and became part of their voice, part of their collective experience of learning. But I also saw it as a way of assessment, as looking at their development, because the computer, even at the most basic level like that, you could keep records. You could keep records of where they were doing, what they were doing, and forms of their development. There's their story. Actually, it's about a third of their story. These two boys had hardly written anything, and they were in year 9, so they were 14 years old. They both went on to do reasonably well at school, not because of this lesson, but they both went on to do reasonably well. They both actually completed A-levels. One of them is still in university and another one's working. But look what they did with this. They call it family murder. And here's the two sequences they created. Since you're at the back, I'll read you the first 2 paragraphs because you're a long way away. It was dark, very dark. I hadn't eaten for days and my skin was itching. I had to get a score soon and my mind would rot. Then I saw her. I didn't stop to think. I ran after her. She turned and screamed and nearly got away. Something inside me made me run faster. Now I've got you, I laughed. Get off me, she screamed. Give me your purse and everything else you have. I've got a gun. This is the BBC News. A 15-year-old girl was found murdered in Bath today. The police have arrested several suspects but say they all deny doing it. The police continue their inquiries He asked everyone to stay calm. What they'd done then was create the dual narrative. They created this dual narrative, which actually was a combined effort that has these two identifiable voices. You have the first person narrative, you have the third person narrative, you have the tone and voice of two very different styles. By the way, they talk about the murder in Bath, because if you live in Chippenham, Bath is a very scary place. So that was the scariest place they could think of. And so to sum up, what I saw in the research that I did there with the interactive project and then on through my PhD and what I'm doing now, are these levels, I call them planes of activity, taken from Malcolm Reed actually, part of this, because all these things are happening at the same time. They're not different levels that a child goes through. They happen at the same time. It's the physical activity, computer's a writing tool, the actual composition, the task completion, the interpersonal semiotic activity, playing with words, dialogue with others, using science systems like language to write, and task understanding, the understanding of the writing task. And then the intrapersonal activity, the activity within their minds, the affective, the things that they like about writing, the personal social histories, the fact that they'd always failed as writers, they now succeed as writers. And finally, that thing that you both alluded to, that sense of task enjoyment, the fact that they enjoyed doing this meant that they created something which I think was a qualitative advance from what they did before.
Thank you very much, Ian.